welcome to Pricing College with your hosts, Aidan Campbell
and Joanna Wells.
If there's one thing people love discussing in this era, it is house prices, more houses, your house, my house, how many houses you have. And, housing bubbles, housing inflation, housing crashes. We've been through it all, really, I suppose, in the last 10 to 15 years since the GFC, etc. So I suppose in today's podcast, we want to maybe give a separate view, a slightly different pricing view, really, on house prices.
Yeah, well, what's been happening with house prices? Let's look at this in terms of what the bank's been doing in interest rates. Interest rates have just been going reduced further and further down to almost nothing, which means, people don't have to spend as much on their mortgage. It's easier to mortgage repayments and potentially what's happening to the prices from there. Are they going up as much when interest rates, are the price of houses going up substantially more than the interest rate, or are things like literally static if you see over years? I think Aidan and I were discussing this earlier. We were saying, in a way, the value of houses sort of is almost remaining the same. They're not going up substantially as interest rates fall. And as Aidan's the economist, he'll probably explain this sort of much better than me. He's not merely just an accountant, he's also an economist here. We think, it has ramifications on, like how price setting, what are the price calculations for price setting calculations for houses. It seems very much the predominant driver here is spend on a national level. And even on a suburb level, yes, we see competitive pricing, price setting dynamics, but it's more than that. It's really, banks looking at our ability to spend on houses, which we are more than happy to as consumers of houses. We see it as an investment. Aidan?
I think let's say this is, we'll talk about Sydney, but obviously you the metrics in your own backyard as well. So let's say in Sydney in 2020 there's a house or a unit that sells for $1 million, and I'm sure if you pop in to meet your elderly neighbours next door, they'll regale you with stories that back in 1984 they bought a very similar property or their property for $20,000, and what a steal. And so you'd be looking at that and you'd go, oh, wish I was born in a different era. I'm paying 50 times the amount of, that they're paying. But that when we look at this from a pricing perspective, you don't, we'll just take a break there for 2 seconds. And we're back again. And I suppose what we're talking about is the elderly neighbours who bought their property for $25,000 and you're kicking yourself that you just spent $1 million. When you really look at it, is that really what you spent and really what they've spent? If you look at your interest rate on your mortgage, it could be around 2%, 2 something in Australia, below 3%. In the UK, it might be 1%. I'm not exactly sure what it'll be in the United States. But when you go back to the mid-80s, interest rates were very commonly above 20%. Inflation was much higher in those years. And so the difference between a 20% inflation rate and a 2%, it's so different. People look at the price tag, but in reality, that's not really what you're paying. You're paying that price. You're paying your mortgage interest and your mortgage, the capital and the interest over the lifetime of the loan, which might be 25 years or 30 years, depending where you are. So really what you're doing is if you add up the actual lifetime cost of that property, let's be honest, I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but the difference between the 25k that the elderly neighbours have spent when they factor it out over 25 years with 20% mortgage interest, it's going to be a lot closer to what you're spending than the initial headline price. And so when we talk about house prices, we really never talk about this factor. Very, very few people will go and buy a property straight off the bat just with a bag of cash. I suppose 80 to 90% of people will have a mortgage of some form or another, and so the headline price really is probably not the best reflection on the actual cost of the property. We often talk about cost of ownership, on this podcast, and when we're talking about that, the cost of finance is so important. So think about what the interest rate dropping really does for you. Or the interest rate increasing, and what the price really was back in the 80s. So the question is are house prices actually in bubbles? Are they actually going up or down? Is that even a relevant concept when we factor in the entire lifetime cost, the money that leaves your actual bank account? Is it really that different, and is there really a bubble? And when we look at that, you're really just asking yourself, do house prices stay just very static over time? And when they do stay very static, is it just purely, a factor that the interest rates are pushing up and down your ability to pay?
No, I suppose ultimately they can't go up so high that people can't afford them. That would defeat the whole purpose of, buying them, and then the banks would be in debt because people wouldn't be able to buy and people wouldn't be able to pay their mortgages. So they're gauging very closely, the market's ability to spend. Interestingly, with shifts in migration from China to Australia, for instance, where we're seeing an increase from there in amount that can be spent on a house. People have argued that is one driver for house prices to increase. But the bank's response to that is to lower interest rates, so people here can also afford to buy. The ramification of that, though, is that people are selling big houses, family homes. Australians are selling them for what they consider to be huge amounts, downsizing into smaller properties or even renting. So maybe as more Chinese people, with wealthy Chinese people who can pay almost cash up front for houses, take on the bigger properties, more land areas in suburban and also city areas. So what is that going to do to the nature of the whole country? Well, we may see a much higher proportion of Australians renting. That's quite unusual for Australians. They're traditionally quite into home ownership. So we'll see a change there. I think in terms of price setting, there's going to be increasing competition, on a sort of but it's going to be minute. It's going to be optimal pricing on a suburban level, as different suburbs get more interest from foreign overseas buyers, etc. There's going to be, obviously on the northern sort of eastern or beaches, there's going to be more expensive. Inland's it's going to be cheaper, but who knows? This is speculation. But overall, interesting price setting based on consumer spending and ability to pay.
Yeah, I suppose anybody who's more interested in this sort of topic and credit-led inflation and credit-led booms, you can look into more of the Austrian School of Economics, which really focuses on those aspects. Often it's not really factored in very much in modern economics, but there certainly is a lot of truth in it. I think, just ask yourself the question when you're talking about pricing of houses. If you bought your house today, let's say at $1 million and interest rates are 2%, and then you try to sell it in 12 months' time, and interest rates are now, for whatever reason, they're up to 19 or 20%, which they were back in the 80s, what would actually happen to the price of your house? Just what would you estimate? Where do you think a good market price for that house would be if you're selling it to a young couple who wants a new home and they're taking out a mortgage? I don't know where the number would be, but I'm very certain it would not be the same price that you paid for it. So yeah, it's just a different alternative viewpoint that really hammers home the idea that pricing is not just the ticket price, it's the payment options, it's the you go in to buy a car, will they give you credit for that car? Will they do a trade-in? Will they do, what's the lifetime of the loan? What is the APR? All these sort of things are so important in selling any product, and sometimes the upfront price tag can actually hide the reality. It's like a loan shark. It's like, you might get a loan of $100. If you get it from the bank, you get it at 3% or 4%. If you get it from a loan shark, you might get it at a significantly higher interest rate and come out with fewer fingers at the end of the day. So all things are different, and the upfront price tag often hides more than it gives.
All right, I think we'll leave it there for today. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Dan. Bye.